thank you. It's really glad to. I'm really glad to be here. I have the title slide up: Digital Accessibility Legal Landscape: Why It Matters for Developers. I have my name, Lainey Feingold. My website, as I mentioned before, is lflegal.com. On my website, I try to share legal updates primarily from the US, but I do try to keep somewhat on top of what's happening in the global space. We'll talk about that in a minute. So lflegal.com, it's written for people who are not lawyers. So I invite you to check it out if you're curious about the legal side of things. I also have my Twitter here, which is at lflegal. And I just want to give you a quick story about my website name, lflegal.com. My Twitter handle at lflegal. So when I got my first website, which was probably late for you guys, but around 15 years ago, I was going to call it LaineyFeingold.com. And a friend of mine who's blind said, you can't call it LaineyFeingold.com. No one will know how to spell Lainey. No one will know how to spell Feingold. And your email address will not fit on your business card in one line of Braille. And he suggested, why don't you just be LF Legal, which then became a brand. It was before Twitter. And I always share that because I am a disability rights lawyer, and my work has really been centered on involving disabled people in legal advocacy initiatives. And without my blind friend thinking about one line of Braille, I would not have this branded kind of name that sounds like I paid a branding agency for it. So listening to disabled people and putting disabled people front and center in the legal space and advocacy is really key. You'll see that there is a dolphin swimming in the background of my title slide, and that is because I think that you do not have to be a shark to be a good legal advocate. I don't think you have to be a shark to be a lawyer, to enforce the kind of laws we're going to talk about. A lot of times people say, oh, you have to be a shark. It's a civil right if you're not strong. In my experience, I have not filed any lawsuits in the last 25 years around digital accessibility, but I have been in the digital accessibility space since 1995, working in collaboration, bringing people together. I've represented blind people primarily and work with large corporations in the US, Bank of America, Walmart, CVS, government agencies, without lawsuits, because true accessibility comes from collaboration. Like Eva said, bringing people with disabilities in is really front and center, and you can do that with the law too. So let's get started. I have more dolphins on this page. I won't have dolphins every page, but dolphins is kind of my spirit animal for this kind of work. Accessibility is a human right of disabled people. If somebody needs to go and take their nap right now, this is the central message of my talk. Accessibility is a human right of disabled people, and that means that all of you as developers are human rights champions, are human rights enforcers, and are human rights heroes, because the work that you do to make websites and mobile apps and kiosks accessible to everyone means that everyone is able to participate and express their human rights. So accessibility is a human right of disabled people. Why do we say that? We say it because when you do the kinds of things that Evis was talking about, when you use the ACTS tools to make sure that you don't have the low-hanging fruit, that the low-hanging fruit isn't there, that your color contrast is right, that your errors are addressed, then you are working to encourage participation of people who can't see, people who can't hold a mouse, people who can't hear, people who, as Eva said, have motion, have responses to motion that are unhealthy, get migraines, cognitive disability. So you are, in your work, creating the ability of people to participate, to communicate, and to do so in privacy and independent privacy and independence. This is an area we're talking about before that, all organizations talk about security. We're secure. We want security. We want privacy. We protect your independence. But without accessibility, there is no privacy. There is no independence for people with disabilities because they need to ask for help. So by doing accessibility and thinking of it as a human right, you're really working to protect participation, communication, and privacy in every sector. So I just put a few up here: civil society, education, health, employment, judicial, transportation, commercial, entertainment. No matter what you do, I don't know the audience in this format. I can't really get to meet you, but you are working to create participation, communication with privacy independence in whatever sector you're in, which all adds up to inclusion. So accessibility is a human right because accessibility is about inclusion. So you can think of it, fill in the blank. My accessible coding means that a disabled student, a disabled patient in a hospital, a disabled shopper can participate in schoolwork, can participate in banking, can participate in entertainment, and can communicate with teachers, can communicate with doctors, can communicate with friends and lovers. So you can fill this in for your own self and just know that it's not a checklist, although checklists matter. It's not a burden like, oh my God, legal requirement, but it's really inviting participation. So it's inviting inclusion. What's the opposite of inclusion? I like this picture. It shows a person kind of looking sadly into a window because they're excluded. So the opposite of inclusion is exclusion, and accessibility is a human right because inclusion in society is what human rights is all about. So as a developer, your role is either exclusion, which I illustrate here by this locked door, or inclusion, which I illustrate by the open door, not just open, but open with sunlight coming in, because those of you who have worked with people with disabilities can truly see the difference in experience when something is accessible and usable and easy and streamlined and smooth. It really is kind of like, I don't want to be too corny, but kind of like light streaming in. So your role as developers can really make a difference between the excluded locked door and the included open door. But these human rights aren't just ideas. They start with ideas, and that's why I like to start with ideas, because I think in our societies, I know this is a global audience, which I love being part of. The law is often, it kind of has a bad reputation. It's like, oh, law and the legal, I don't know how many of you have had situations where your legal departments are like limiting instead of creating, allowing you to experience all the benefits of accessibility. So I'd like to start with the ideas, but it's not just ideas. Ideas are baked into laws. I like baking analogies. I often talk about them. I write about them. And I asked Juho, what kind of baked goods do you have in Finland? I know not everybody's from Finland, but I'm very excited to try this one day. Blueberry, I put it in the Google Translate. Speaking of translation, it said blueberry rooster, also better translated, I guess, as blueberry purse, because you're folding the blueberries in. And this picture looks delicious. I put the website where I got the picture. You can also get the recipe at martat.fi. And the idea is that the human rights principles that really underscore all our work in doing accessibility are baked into laws. So what do those laws look like? There are laws, the title here on the slide said laws plus 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 around the world. Those pluses stand for there are laws, there are treaties, there are regulations, there are constitutions that recognize the right of people with disabilities to fully participate in society. In 2021, that is not possible without digital accessibility. So it may be that the laws don't yet reach, like it was mentioned earlier, outside the US and a few countries, most of the emphasis is still in the public sector. But the laws and all these other legal types of documents are moving towards a time when we have specific laws incorporating the human rights ideas for inclusion. So I like this picture of a globe, graphic of a globe with people with disabilities. You can see people in wheelchairs, some with a guide dog on top of the globe. But what I did on this slide is just give you a few examples in the short time we have, and even if we had a longer time. I just realized I put my timer on, but I forgot to press start. So I'm going to just do myself a time check. The laws are so different. The good news is that the legal standard of the WCAG 2.1 AA in Europe, the EN 301549, are pretty international and standardized. When I first started working on web accessibility, it was in the mid-90s, and I was asked by some blind people to help them get ATMs that talk, so blind people can independent access to their own money. And we were working on the talking ATMs in this collaborative way without a lawsuit. And about 4 years into the negotiation, because there were no talking ATMs anywhere at the time, about 4 years into the negotiation, our blind clients came to us and said, okay, great, we're making good progress on talking ATMs, but there's this new thing called online banking, which at one point was new around 1997, 98 when we started working on it. And we better make that accessible, our clients told us, or else we're going to be again locked out of access to our financial information. And I had never heard of web accessibility. I had barely heard of the web. And I got involved with the Web Accessibility Initiative and learned like the most important thing you can do is use these standards, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which at the time were at 1.0. And just, I think they're 20 years old in 2020. I don't know, it was around 98, 99. And so we put that in our agreements that the United States banks would use the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines because I was convinced that internationalization of the standards was so important. And that is really how it has developed. Most countries, the European Union, and the United States that have laws use the same standards. So that is good. The Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, CRPD, has so much great language about the rights of people with disabilities to participate in the digital world, specifically about accessibility, education, government. So that is a source. We'll talk in a minute how these laws are used, but just to know, like to put it in your pocket. It's not like these are just some ideas. These are actually incorporated into laws around the country, European Accessibility Act and the Web Accessibility Directive. Finland adopted the CRPD in 2016. Thank you. The United States has not adopted it yet. And Finland has a law, which you all know more than I do, about digital accessibility, requiring an accessibility statement using the EN 301549 standard. I put another parts of the world up here: France, Africa, United States, and Canada, of course. I'll talk about the US in a bit. The real thing I want to share is how can you keep up with it, and how can you find out what's happening in your own country? So because things are constantly changing. So the most important sort of takeaway is the laws are there and they're constantly evolving. I have a post on my website, lflegal.com, which doesn't have Finland yet, but I'm going to add it. And you can find it, you can search the word Japan, because there's not many articles about Japan. You can find it that way, or it's in the most popular articles. I try to keep that up. And at the top, I also link to other resources that are also trying to keep up. So I invite you, if you go there and your country is not represented, I get a lot of the updates from audience members that I speak to, people I know from Twitter. So feel free to let me know what's happening in your country. I spoke with someone from Germany yesterday, and I say, well, how do you keep up? And he's like, it's really talking to people on the ground. The laws aren't just in the books. They're how are people using them and what's happening. So the laws exist, but laws need enforcement. Without enforcement, you just have something written on a piece of paper. Better than just an idea in the head, but still it's on a piece of paper. Again, a baking analogy. So without enforcement, the laws are unbaked. Unbaked. With enforcement, the laws are baked. This is another Finnish baked good that I learned about. And it's pulla bread. I don't know how you pronounce it. Pulla. It's unbaked in one picture and it's baked in the other picture. This I got from feastingathome.com. I want to make this too. So how are laws enforced? Disabled people every day are enforcing the laws. Every day. And I bring that up here because many of your organizations or all your organizations should have a way for people to give feedback. And that feedback is really enforcing civil rights laws and giving you as developers the opportunity to enforce civil rights laws. People do not call up and say, you violated my legal right. You violated section XYZ of some law. No, they call up with the practical impact of these laws. I can't find what I'm looking for. I can't see the screen because the print is too light. Again, the color contrast. I know you have a video, but I don't know what it's saying because I'm deaf and I can't hear the speaker. So it's a real opportunity for people inside organizations, champions as all you are, or you wouldn't be here at this conference, at this talk, to find out how are these laws being enforced by people with disabilities, trying to enforce them, and then you can pick it up and actually enforce them. Government agencies do work in the United States. I don't really know what's happening in Finland on this or specifically in some other countries. I do know there is work. The European Disability Forum keeps good track of that. It's a good way to find out. There are lawsuits, fewer lawsuits in other parts of the world than there are in the US. Lawsuit was just filed in Canada. Actually, it was a government agency complaint in Canada in the last 2 weeks on airline access, airline website accessibility, and through collaborations. As I said, that has been my main way of doing this work, through collaborations and by developers who deliver accessible code. How are laws enforced? By developers who deliver accessible code. So let's talk. I just want to share a few of the lawsuits in the US, just so you have a sense of what's happening here. These are kind of my favorites. The state of California bought a website for its parks department where people could register for camping sites. They paid $6 million for this website. It was delivered without accessibility. This is the question of procurement and making sure technology that's purchased for employees and the public and customers is accessible. This was $6 million is a lawsuit to try to recover that $6 million for the public because it was delivered inaccessible. There's Winn-Dixie grocery store. The reason I want to mention this is because this was a case where a part of the United States federal court system said websites are not covered by the law in the United States, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I bring it up because sometimes information gets out there on Twitter or LinkedIn, big loss for web accessibility in the Winn-Dixie case. But in fact, in the US, the federal court system has 11 or 12 different sections. There's every state, there's 50 states, every state, not every state has a law, but many do, could be different. So this Winn-Dixie grocery store only applied to 3 southern states, which, as you may know, are the more conservative states in the United States. Most courts in the United States are saying that the Americans with Disabilities Act does cover websites. Why? Back to the human rights angle, because the Americans with Disabilities Act is very wide-ranging law about including people with disabilities in all aspects, and there is no inclusion in 2021 without accessibility. And then the last one, Domino's Pizza. I have a big picture of a pizza here because that also got a lot of international attention. The US Supreme Court had a chance to talk about web accessibility. They chose not to, which meant that one of those other courts in the federal system got to have the last word in that case, which was yes, people can file lawsuits about the lack of web accessibility in the US. This is a picture of a shark, and it's playing the Jaws theme in the background. I don't know if you can hear that. I don't like sharks, as I said before, and I have a big purple X covering the shark because uh, lawsuits play a really important role in the United States. Enforcement actions play an important role. You can, as Eva said, you can use a law card, but as a motivator, because fear is not a good motivator. Fear is not a good motivator. It's constricting. It makes people want to do the minimum. That happens in the US because while lawsuits have played an important role, they've also, we have a lot of unethical lawsuits as well as ethical ones. So fear is not good. A better way to avoid lawsuits is another baking analogy, accessibility baked in from the start. I have a article on my website. It's called Accessibility is Delicious. You can find it through Google if you're interested. And it talks about a lot of baking analogies. The primary one people use is you cannot put the blueberries in the muffin once the muffin is baked, which is why I put in another picture of the blueberry purse, the blueberry rooster, because it's a blueberry analogy and it's perfect because your role as developers to make sure that accessibility gets in there and is not thought about just when it comes to the testing phase. Of course, there is the idea of shift left, and it's really important to have accessibility in the design phase before it gets to the developers. But this is a better way to avoid lawsuits than fear that you're going to get hit with a lawsuit. So I just want to close with a couple of ideas like this. Accessibility baked in from the start. Accessibility, many ingredients, many roles, with another picture of the pull of bread. So, this is a talk for developers, and I think you all play such a crucial role in accessibility, but I also want to acknowledge that you cannot do it yourselves. And it's really important in organizations not to just put the accessibility burden on the shoulders of the developers, because it matters for design, it matters for testing, marketing, HR. There's almost not a role in the modern organization that doesn't have an accessibility obligation. Matt May from Adobe, who you may know, he has an expression. He says, some people need to know a lot about accessibility, and that's you all, but everybody needs to know. Everybody needs to know something. So that's why I like to use the ingredient. I often show a picture of cookies and say, oh, there's so many ingredients in the cookies, and it's for all the roles that make accessibility happen. And one of those roles is the law. I like to say the law is a salt, because if there's too much salt in a baked good, then it's not going to taste very good. But if there's not enough salt, it also won't be sweet. So it's important to understand that the law is integral to the work that you do, but not so much that it's driving companies by fear. So accessibility, not one and done, and no shortcuts. Couple things on the shortcuts. If you're not familiar with the overlay problem, I tend to call it an overlay crisis. I invite you to look at overlayfactsheet.com. I'm going to check that. Somehow it's not sounding right to me. These are one line of code software that promise full ADA compliance with one line of JavaScript inserted into your website. They don't work. There's been a lot written about it. I've done talks about it. This is something that, in my view, has partially come from so many lawsuits in the US. So the work is not one and done, which is why understanding the civil rights background and foundation of your work is so important, because if it's just a checklist, you're not going to remember, oh, there's a new release. Did we make sure accessibility is still there? Have we incorporated feedback from our customers? What are we doing about procurement? So it's not one and done. And that's really why you all are heroes, because you're doing it day in and day out, probably sometimes having to struggle with your own internal teams, internal, higher ups to make sure it happens. And most important, of course, involving disabled people. This is a picture from disabilityin.org. They have, that's what I'm looking for, stock photos of disabled people. This shows 3 people working, getting disabled people involved from the start. I'll just tell you one quick story. I worked with a major finance company in the US for a blind woman who used a braille display and JAWS. And she was an options trader, which is a super fast financial stock trading kind of thing. And she could do everything. They made a switch. They forgot it's not one and done. She couldn't do it anymore. We brought her to a meeting, had a big screen at the top, and she shared her experience, went through the whole website, and the developers were there, the trainers, the decision makers, the lawyers, and everyone was just kind of jaw-dropping to watch this woman do options trading with, she's completely blind, just using the JAWS and the braille display. So that company turned around in that 1.5 hour meeting, seeing her. I mean, how many of you as developers have seen your work in the hands of people with disabilities? How many of the people holding the purse strings in your organization have seen your work in the hands of disabled people? So that is really critical too. And like I said, accessibility is delicious. And this is another finished treat. So I want to make sure we have a few minutes for questions. So I'll stop there and say, stay in touch. You can reach out to me through my website, lflegal.com, on the contact page, or let's connect on Twitter or LinkedIn. I like to say accessibility is global. This conference proves it. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me, and let's have some questions.
You know what's interesting is that at work I forget to mute, and then everyone can hear my very loud keyboard. Thank you so much for this presentation. It also made me incredibly hungry, though. So much I had to go pick up a yogurt. It didn't fulfill my need of sweets, but well, it did something.
I know.
Yeah. Do you? I don't think for now we are waiting for one question. Does anyone in one of the speakers have any questions they would like to ask? And then we're gonna go to the takeaways. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The struggle of getting this is getting clients funding, or doing accessibility improvements, getting PO project managers to accept it, basically getting money. Yeah, I agree. From my experience, it's also that. And I think that,
I don't know.
Go. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I don't know if you guys know the consulting firm Intopia in Australia. They're an accessibility consultancy, and they have a great talk they've done on how do you do that convincing, and how everybody's different. Some people are going to react to the threat of a lawsuit. Some people are going to be motivated to do the right thing, like we were saying earlier. Some people are going to be motivated by the shaming and keeping up with the corporate. But I feel like we're on a cusp of real change here. There's so many accessibility jobs, and COVID has really shown people how important the digital is. So I'm an optimist. Yeah. I forgot to mention I have a book on collaborating around these issues, and one of the things I talk about is the importance of optimism. That it can be hard for us, but we have to remain optimistic that the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice, and I think that's happening here.
Someone is saying that I'm not sure if devs are willing to work on accessibility because of ever tight roadmaps, but who convinces management that it provides value so that devs work at it? I think it has to honestly come from devs in this case. I think you have to be the person that has to say it.
I think I always encourage people to go to the Microsoft accessibility portal, look at the fact that Microsoft did a Super Bowl ad. I mean, I know Super Bowl is just a US thing, but they did a national ad on their accessible gaming controller, and they always talk about design for one, build for all. And that, like, why is Google did an ad about their captioning on the big entertainment show here. So I think these large companies are setting a standard that this stuff matters.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think it's also about like these large companies. They're a lot of the times they're not the best when it comes to human rights, but they are the best when it comes to money. And I think everyone's just starting to realize just because you're disabled doesn't mean you're poor, doesn't mean you don't have money. And they're starting to be like, oh wait, there's like 20% of the population we haven't tapped in, so I guess we should tap into that. And then they use this as this like very good motive. Well, it's just like we kind of just want more money. And I'm like, I don't care why you're doing it. At least you're doing it. Like that doesn't matter. Yeah.
Can I add something? Well, for example, generally people who have, let's say, damaged hearing or have issues with, can see that, well, that doesn't have to mean that it usually with us that we are, how to say, more motivated. And people who are more motivated, even if they have some limit, will always try to achieve more. So I think it's always worth to look into accessibility and to do something for people, for those kind of people, because we need to make our webs accessible so that everyone can easily see it, read it, and I think that should include both accessibility in general and even, as I was talking about, localizations as well. So we should definitely try to have a full package, in my opinion.
Definitely, yeah.